I've been fat for 25 years, or I had been fat for 25 years, and over the course of the last 2.5 decades, I always, as Fat Keely, promised prospective Thin Keely that I would make a number of changes to my lifestyle that would ultimately benefit me. But once I'd lost the weight, or once I'd got within a stone of my target weight. And the reality is that I spent the last 25 years trapped in a cycle of not making sustainable weight loss change because I didn't make these changes. So today I want to share with you the 10 changes that I've made, which have been fundamental, not just to my fat loss, but to my lifestyle, which have led me to a place of being a healthy weight for the first time as an adult in my whole life. I've now got a BMI of 24.2 and the lowest weight that I've been since I was a teenager, coming up the stone barriers, as my current weight is 12 stone 1. So I began my weight loss journey last August, and at the time that I began my weight loss journey, I was 20 stone 12 pounds, so nearly 300 pounds. And I, like all the other times I thought about weight loss, it was I just needed to get this weight off as quickly as possible before I can focus on any of the healthy stuff that comes with that. The reality was that was never going to happen, and what happened last August is I began to lose weight. I did the same cycle. I lost weight really quickly. I lost 4 stone 6 pounds by November, so just around 4 months. And then I hit a brick wall, and I'd hit a brick wall before November, so probably around the end of September, beginning of October, I began to struggle to maintain the really reduced diet that I was on, and I was having days where I wasn't eating as much, relying on weight loss shakes, and really getting straight back into that really unhealthy cycle. And by November, I had lost 4 stone 6 pounds, and then I struggled. So I went up 21 pounds, came back down 9 pounds, and by April, I'd sort of reached a limit, and that's when I went to my GP, was referred for weight loss medication, and then I purchased it myself and began my journey on the 1st of May. At this point now, I have been on this current journey, so overall weight loss 13 months, and my current Mounjaro journey since the 1st of May, so we're in my 22nd week, and I've lost 123 pounds in total, 77 of those pounds on Mounjaro since May. And I've talked a lot in my other videos about the exclusive benefits of Mounjaro and what it's done for me and how it's aided my weight loss. But equally, I want to, in this video, talk exclusively about the changes that I've made, which have enabled me to continue on this weight loss journey and ultimately be successful. As I said, I've never lost this much weight before, and this is the lowest weight that I have been since I was a teenager. So that's what I'm going to focus on in this video. So, tip number 1, or habit number 1, or change number 1, I stopped demonising food. And what I mean by this is I have lived my whole life with bad foods, good foods, and any measure of a successful diet was if I only ate the good foods, so, you know, all the healthy foods, if I only ate those, I was doing well. If I even remotely thought about or had a bite of a quote-unquote bad food, then I had failed, and that would send me into a binge cycle. So what would happen would be I would restrict enormously, and I would only eat select foods that I considered, or we all consider, healthy. I wouldn't be able to sustain that, partly because I was starving most of the time and really, really restrictive. I would then eat the foods that I considered to be bad. I would then think I had failed. I would then go through that cycle for a little bit, wouldn't be able to maintain it, would gain back the weight that I'd lost, and normally 2-3 stone on top of that. And so I no longer look at food in the same way. Yes, there are foods that are better for you. Of course there are. Your fruits, your veg, your food that isn't heavily produced, so your natural foods, all of those sorts of things. And then there are the foods that aren't so good for you that we know about, the heavily produced foods, the foods that have lots and lots of different ingredients and unhealthy ingredients. However, I've stopped looking at it like, to be successful on a weight loss journey or a fat loss journey, that you can only eat from select groups. Of course, you want to be getting, for the nutritional benefits, the good stuff, but actually it doesn't mean you failed if you go to the bad stuff, and I've stopped considering those things bad. They're just things I want to eat less of. And actually on this journey, they're things that naturally I don't eat as much anyway because I want to eat less of. So that's tip number one. I've stopped demonizing food. And I think in my last video, I talked about diet culture and the other diets and weight loss methods that I tried, and how actually a large bulk of that, those diets and those weight loss clubs, for example, they do demonize food. So for example, I talked about Slimming World, and I know they've changed it now, they're in the process of changing it, but you would have your SINs. And while SINs was short for synergy points, ultimately SINs, we all know what the reference was there, and people would use their SINs for bad food. I remember being in a group and hearing somebody say, I'm not going to use my SINs for an avocado, I'm going to have a pot noodle. And that's because it was that mindset, and that's a mindset I've been trapped in for a long time. But actually, by not demonizing food and just looking at food as what it is, it takes that pressure away. And for me, that's helpful. 2, I stopped believing that the only way to lose weight was to be heavily, heavily restrictive and starving yourself. So again, I come from a mentality of the only measure of a successful diet, or the only way to lose weight, is to starve yourself effectively. So to be really, really restrictive, not just with what you're eating, but the quantities of what you're eating. And I would always take that to extreme measures. Number 3, I learned that what the scales say is not exclusively around fat gain or fat loss. And that again is huge. I've talked about so much the impact of Mounjaro in taking away the food voice, but also the impact of my current lifestyle on no longer having the scale voice. And what I mean by that is, for years and years and years, I was absolutely not only dominated by the food voice and the hunger, but I was dominated by what the scales said. So if I stood on the scales, and I used to stand on the scales multiple times a day, so sometimes I would stand on the scales 10 times a day. No logic to it. There was no, I just was obsessed with standing on the scales and seeing what that number said. And if I stood on the scales and that it said I'd gone up 2 pounds, I would be devastated. Equally, if I stood on the scales and it said you've lost half a pound, maintained, I would be absolutely devastated, and I would feel like a failure. And that would lead me to repeat that cycle of harmful behaviour and binging, starving. And when I used to go to Slimming World, I'd feel like some weeks I'd done amazingly well, and I'd get on the scales and it would say you've maintained, or you've lost half a pound, or you've gained, and I would be just beside myself, and it would dominate my whole week and lead me to really unhealthy habits. The reality is, so much is going on with our bodies that when we stand on the scales, it is not just remotely about fat loss. So for example, a couple of weeks ago, I lost 9 pounds. Now, there's no way, and I know for a fact that that was not 9 pounds in fat. Majority of that would have been fluid and water. Is it nice to stand on the scales and see you've lost 9 pounds? Absolutely. It's not 9 pounds of fat. And in the whole 123 pounds I've lost, how much of that is actually fat? A large proportion, but it won't be the full 123 pounds. And that for me is really important to know, because it's significant in not allowing that to dominate my life anymore. And I'm at the point now where I can see I've lost a lot of weight. I feel a lot more comfortable, and I'm not so governed by the scales. Do I still stand on them? Yes, because I do these videos and it's helpful, but there are weeks when I just don't, and I no longer, if I don't want to, I'm just not going to. And there are absolutely times that I don't. And that's because I have a better understanding that the scales are a guide. They're not the full story. Number 4, I educated myself on the difference between weight loss and fat loss. And I've been a part of diet culture for a long time, and every group I ever went to, I never heard them say fat loss. We talked about weight loss. And the reality is, you lose a lot of fluid initially, you lose a lot of water weight. And as I said, throughout my journey, I've just lost 9 pounds a couple of weeks ago. And there was no way that was 9 pounds of fat, because actually now that I'm so much thinner, I can quite clearly see. Before, I just put fat on all over my body, and so my whole body had fat on it. Now I can see that I've got areas of fat to lose, and so I can see that where I was before I lost that 9 pounds and where I was after. And actually, in terms of my body structure and where the fat was, that hasn't really changed. So understanding the difference between weight loss and fat loss, and that falls into what it does to the scales, is huge, because actually I'm on a fat loss and health journey and healthy lifestyle journey, as opposed to before, when my mindset was I just need to lose as much weight as possible by any means, as long as I stand on the scales. And my mindset would have been, last year even, if I could stand on the scales and lose £9, I wouldn't care what that makeup of that £9 was, whether it was water, fat. As long as it was £9 less, it wouldn't matter. Now I'm more about how can I get rid of the remaining fat and, you know, the visceral fat, and that's my mindset. And I think that's really significant in terms of then understanding why the impact of the scales is less, because actually the scale is only telling you a very small percentage. I've changed setting myself unrealistic targets, and I used to set myself unrealistic targets about everything. So, for example, weight loss targets, I would set myself hugely unrealistic ones, in that in a few videos ago, I found one of my old diaries where I'd logged my Slimming World journey through COVID, and sort of documenting that 12-week time frame I have with the weight loss journey, and how unrealistic and unsustainable that was. And in that journey, I clearly documented that, but also showed how unrealistic my targets were. So I'd set myself 3 months to lose 5 stone. Part of that is because, as I said, I can lose weight really quickly, and that always became my reliance. It didn't matter how fat I got, I could always lose weight really quickly. So I could always undo that damage, was the mindset. Not the reality, but the mindset. And when I first started out on this Mounjaro journey, it was I need to lose as much weight as possible, as quickly as possible. And that's really, really shifted, because now how can I tone up? How can I be healthy? How can I maintain this weight in a healthy way that's gonna do something good for my body? 6, I've stopped living in the future. And what I mean by that is, Fat Keely used to make prospective Thin Keely lots of promises about what I would do when I got to my target weight or near to it. So it was all about losing weight really quickly. And I used to think, right, when I get to within a stone of my target, I will start to eat healthily. I will be consistent at the gym. I will focus on self-care. I will do all those things once I get where I need to be. The reality is, by not doing those things, I never got where I needed to be. And so that was always just a promise. That it's a bit like the promise of, I'll suffer now, but I'll change it to live the life I want to in the future. The reality is, any one of us could reinvent ourselves in the next half an hour if we really wanted to. The power of change lies within ourselves. And if you don't start somewhere, you're never going to start. And I've got 2.5 decades of evidence of that I always promised myself something would be different. Once I got to a certain place, well, I couldn't get to that certain place because I never changed the things that ultimately needed to be different. And a part of that was that living for the future and not living for the now. And I've definitely changed that. I live for the now, and the reality is the future's not promised. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. I promised myself, and I achieved for myself, consistency with food, exercise and water. And the reality is, because actually by being consistent, no one else gains from that. I'm not promising consistency to anybody else. No one's got a gun to my head saying you must be consistent with the gym, otherwise I'm going to shoot you. The reality is that when I haven't been consistent, ultimately it's only me that's suffered from that. And, you know, consistency is really, really important, I think, in any changes that you're trying to make. And I don't enjoy the prospect of going to the gym or doing a park run or walking 10,000 steps a day, but I've said it before, I don't regret it when I've done it, and I always feel better physically and mentally. And it's an important part of this journey, and the maintenance of it and the healthiness of it. And actually, going back to the previous point about making Fat Keely making promises to prospective Thin Keely, when I used to think about what I wanted for my ideal self, I thought about somebody that, you know, had a good job, had a degree, drove a nice car, had a nice house, had a family, but that was also thin and active and healthy. And there was always I achieved a lot of that, but there was always that that thing missing that came to self-care and self-identity. And consistency is what I need to move from losing fat into maintenance and sustaining this. And actually, it's not just around the physical effects of the body, it's around the mental effects and how much clearer I am, and the clarity and the mind healthiness that all of that consistency gives me. And even on the days when I don't want to do it, when I've done it, I always feel better. And so the only person losing out if I'm not consistent is me, and the only person gaining if I'm consistent is me. So ultimately, it pays me to be consistent. I practice self-care and I no longer reward myself with food. So the last part of that is I've always had a disordered relationship with food, even before I gained weight. And when I've been in the diet culture, and for example, when I used to go to Slimming World, I used to starve myself before my Slimming World group, and then I'd go to my Slimming World group, and then I would have my day off where I essentially just binged and ate everything I wanted to eat. And sometimes I would purposefully go to a morning Slimming World group so that I could have a whole day of eating. And if I could only go in the evening, I would cram as many calories into that evening as I possibly could. And that rewarding myself with food led me further down the path of deprivation, and the good and the bad foods, because I was going to be good all week so that I could be bad on the day after I'd gained. And also the thing I wasn't looking at, which common sense tells you, is that if I ate, let's say, 10,000 calories in one day, I've then still got to burn off those 10,000 calories, and I wasn't living a healthy lifestyle at that point. So the reality is I was fighting an uphill battle. So I no longer reward myself with food because I don't deprive myself and I'm not restrictive. So I don't need to reward myself with food. But equally, I reward myself with all the things I always wanted to be able to do. So the self-care, going, getting your hair done, the nails, a massage, or going out and going on a trip, on a holiday, all those things that build memories. I do those now, as opposed to rewarding myself with food, which one was just food that I just ate there and then, and always regretted and was always angry and annoyed with myself for. So ultimately, I never gained on a cheat day, other than satisfying a binge that made me more miserable and led me further down the path of unhappiness. Number 9, I eat what I feel like eating. And that again leads me back into the previous point about not needing to reward myself with food, because there are no good or bad foods now. And whilst I, on the Mounjaro journey, don't crave things as much, and I don't have the food voice, which naturally eliminates a lot of those wants to eat the things that aren't healthy for you. If I do want something, I just have it. If I do want a KFC, I'll have it. If I want some sweets, I'll have them. Last night, we stayed in a hotel. I had a 3-course meal. I had a starter. I just know when to stop. And I had a brownie because it was within the meal. Wasn't actually very nice. It was very bitter. But the point being, I wasn't terrified of eating that. I wasn't angry with myself or having a battle with myself at the meal table thinking you shouldn't have it, but you want it. I just had a little bit of it, and I had a little bit of the starter and a bit of the main. And I was satisfied and I was done. And, if I want something, I'll have it. And I don't need to worry about it, because I know I'm not going to eat loads and loads of it. And I know that once I've eaten it, I'll move on from it, and I'll carry on as normal. Before, that would never have happened. I would have deprived myself, and then I would have binged and never satisfied that. So I would always be craving, which means I would always be binging and stuck in that cycle. And now I'm so in control, it doesn't matter. Like, it's just food. And if that's what everyone else is having, I'll have some of it. If that's what I fancy, I'll have a bit of pizza. It's not the end of the world. And finally, point 10, I am more focused and routined in my daily life around food, exercise, and, for example, water. And whilst that sounds like, that sounds like hard work, it really isn't. I use MyFitnessPal. I don't track all my macros. I have an awareness of calories, because ultimately weight loss and maintenance is calories in versus calories out. And I just have an awareness, and I use MyFitnessPal. And the reality is, I used to spend 20, 30, 40 minutes a day on Deliveroo or Just Eat, ordering takeaway and looking at what I wanted to eat. And on a day that it's taking me a long time, 20 minutes on MyFitnessPal, logging my food for the day and having an awareness. At the minute, it's a little bit longer because I'm keeping food diaries for videos. However, the reality is I don't need to do... The reality is that it's 20 minutes out of my day, and ultimately I'm probably always going to have some level of control around understanding what I've eaten and how to get into maintenance. But I would much rather waste 20 minutes a day logging what I've eaten than be stuck in a cycle where I lose 2.5 decades and lose 40 minutes a day to choosing takeaway food or going to the kebab van. And, you know, like, it's not hard work. The hardest work it becomes is if I forget to log something, or I'm at work and I don't log it, and then I have to go back and retrospectively think about and log what I ate and try and remember what exactly it was and, you know, how much of it I ate. That's when that becomes most difficult. Or if I have a meal that I can't find on MyFitnessPal and I have to find an alternative or something like that, that's when it's difficult. Outside of that, we're literally talking minutes of a day, scanning a barcode. It really isn't, and it helps me on days maybe where I eat more to know when I need to stop, or when I'm in line. And a part of that as well is understanding my BMR, my basal metabolic rate, and understand what my body's doing. And by doing that, I'm educated about myself and far more in control. And if that sounds like hard work, the fat Keely that used to eat what she wanted and not track anything, never went anywhere, was self-conscious, wouldn't be able to walk up a hill because I couldn't breathe and I was sweaty, would wear jumpers and leggings in the summer, would miss out on every opportunity going because I ate what I wanted and I didn't track it. But there's some sort of mindset that I'm depriving myself of by just not allowing myself to eat what I want. But actually, I'm not depriving myself. But I did deprive myself for 2.5 decades. I deprived myself of a life. And that's the reality of it. And yeah, I'll have to be a bit more measured and I'll have to have an element of control about it, probably forever. But I'm now the slim Keely that fat Keely always wanted to be. And I'm fond of fat Keely because I sympathise with her and I empathise with her, and I know that she was trapped. And I know she was desperately unhappy. She also fought hard and got us where we need to be. And there will always be that part of me. However, I'm where we are now, where we wanted to be. It sounds like I've got like hundreds of us going on. Probably have. But I'm where we always wanted to be to an extent. There's still work to do. But without making these changes, I wouldn't be here. And that's ultimately the trap, isn't it? That you know it's not working, but you default back to something that you know could work, and you just put too much pressure on yourself to do better. Do all of that again, but the reason it will work this time is because you're going to deprive yourself more, and you're going to, even when you're starving and you've not eaten for days, you're going to force yourself through that, and you'll get where you need to be, and then you can focus. That was never ever going to happen. And I lost 2.5 years to fighting the fight to make that happen. I don't need to make that happen now. And I've made these changes, which were fundamental to enabling me to get where we are. And as I said, at this point, I'm a year in. I've lost 123 pounds. And yeah, I've just got a whole different outlook and a different life than the one that I craved all of those years. So if you've got any changes or habits that you've made that have been fundamental to your journey, do leave them in the comments below. It'd be a really interesting conversation. And thank you for watching. What I would say is I'm going to do a Q&A for next week at some point. So if you could leave your comments underneath here for the Q&A if you've got any questions, or I put a post on with a poll, you could put your comments there. And then I will aim to record that video on Thursday, maybe with a view to it going up next weekend. So Please do leave your comments, like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.